Welcome to the Predictive Playbook for March 23rd, 2021. I have the pleasure of being with Steve Merril of WagerTalk. He is a professional sports handicapper of 25 plus years. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning that because I started at the same time as he did. And he's also a TV host and guest over at WagerTalk, and obviously he's a guest on my show, which I'm thrilled to death about. He's won number one titles in football, basketball, baseball during this 25 years of experience. And Steve, I lost the train of thought there for a second, but this whole weekend is kind of maybe lose my train of thought with, for example, I had Florida, and Oral Roberts beats him outright, and I have to admit it, with all this experience, sometimes you still feel pretty dumb. And then on Monday, yesterday, I was a little hesitant to pull the trigger on Iowa, even though that was leaning pretty heavy. Fortunately, I didn't. But it feels like the tournament, if you did real well to this point, you probably should exercise some severe caution because I think those trends are going to go the other way. And conversely, if you didn't do so good, you still have time to make it up, but you got to remain disciplined here. If you're down 2,000, you don't put 2,000 on tonight's games, and you don't put 2,000 on one single game on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. It's just a recipe for disaster. But anyway, after that negativity, welcome to the show. And how did you do this past weekend?
Yeah, I was choppy. I mean, it's actually something good to talk about because you're leading right into what I wanted to talk about, actually, John. You, of course, got a financial background, and I do a lot in the financial markets as well. We've talked about it several times, and the analogies between the two have always been fascinating for me. I started more, you kind of started more in the financials, moved over to sports. I started more in sports and then moved over to financials now. But they're a natural mix. And the one key to both of them is long-term thinking, long-term investment approach. And what makes or breaks, in my opinion, the guys that make it like 30 plus years like we have in both endeavors is the emotional discipline and money management. And you notice I didn't even say picking the right teams or picking the right stocks or commodities. I said money management, emotional discipline. The selection is third, and people forget that. And unfortunately, in the business we're in, a lot of people live and die by daily results, and that's just the nature of the beast, and we accept that. But we also have some good long-term clients. And I'd like to think people that are watching Predictive Playbook, by the way, fall into that latter category. That's why I love doing this segment with you, because I think that it's a small minority of the sports betting market, but it's one that I love to cater to. It's those sharp, intelligent, long-term thinkers. And I know you've interacted with some viewers of this show. I've reached out. Some of them have reached out to me the last couple of weeks since I've started doing it as well. And I can tell the difference. These aren't guys that are like, who do you like tonight? What's your lock tonight? They're long-term thinkers. But to get back to the point about the tournament, this is a textbook example. Other than the Super Bowl, this is the most publicly bet sporting event. And it's even more so because it's 60-some games. It's 2 or 3 weeks. The Super Bowl is a one-off. But the NFL is the most bet sport. The Super Bowl is the king of that. College basketball tournament's next out of all the sports, more than baseball, more than NBA, more than anything. So you get a lot of recreational short-term thinkers, unfortunately. And this is a perfect example. I was down maybe a game or two overall in the March Madness. But guess what, for this season, as 69-46 still. And that's with a couple games down in the tournament. So still 69-46, 73% return on investment at WagerTalk.com. That's how I like to look at it. That's only a 3-month span. You go back over 5-10 years, it's even more. 20 years, it's even more. But you're right. People live and die by short-term results. And so far, my takeaway for the tournament has to be the Pac-12. Obviously, vastly overperformed. In fact, the only team that lost was Colorado. And keep in mind, they had to play a few hours after learning there was a mass shooting in Boulder last night. I don't know how much that affected their mindset, but it obviously wasn't a positive, probably. And I still, by the way, liked Florida State in that matchup. I did Wager Talk today. Yesterday, I mentioned that game on the show because Florida State has turnover problems. Colorado doesn't force them. But still, you got to wonder the mindset of those players, and that's the only team. And then you see USC come out and win by 30-some as basically a pick-em. As you mentioned, Oregon upsetting Iowa. So these haven't been fluke results. And then on the other side of that Iowa game, once again, the Big Ten, another bad loss. And Michigan's the only one left standing, and they're still a little shorthanded. So, yeah, that's my big takeaway by far is Pac-12, Big Ten, no doubt about it.
I've been toying with the idea of writing an article this week about the Big Ten. We all kind of like the Big Ten. speaking for myself especially. And I just wonder in this COVID era, well, it's not really an era, thank God, it's 1 year, that the road teams had advantages with no fans. The noise factor, especially like you imagine a Duke, playing there at Cameron Stadium, that had to be hard to play when all those students are jumping around and carrying it on, and it's all a great environment. Not saying it's not, but in football, you can see it right away. And then the teams that do have the monster stadiums, like a Penn State or Michigan, now, Ohio State might have been the exception, but they struggled at home because it must have been like playing in a tomb. The echoes, and your family's not there, and it just had to be an experience that I can't even get my hands around to understand. But here too, I think the crowd noise. Imagine the Arkansas Texas Tech game coming down the wire with a full stadium. I'm not saying the result would have been different, but we don't know. And especially with the Cinderellas, and I certainly don't think Loyola is a Cinderella. Kyle Hunter, who gave me the idea of doing the futures bet for the NCAA Tournament of Loyola, probably a good 5-6 weeks ago, 50-1. We did it a second time at 45-1. I also did Illinois to win, and lo and behold, they get matched up in the second round of the NCAA Tournament. So at least I knew I was going to have one left. But I think I have the right one. I mean, in terms of money management and ultimate ROI payoff, Loyola at 45-1, I would have never got Illinois that, even if it was in the 1960s. But Loyola, I don't think is really a Cinderella team anymore. They're ranked. It's not like an Abilene Christian or an Oregon State at this point. They're for real. And I wouldn't be surprised right now if they are the team that's cutting down the nets. I think they really truly can get to the Final Four, and we'll just have to see how much guts I have, Steve, to keep riding this until I decide to hedge it. That's the $1 million question.
Well,
at least
I was going to say, what I'd recommend hedging it is, I believe that eventual Elite Eight matchup against the Houston, correct? I believe that's the same bracket.
That's right.
So, I put out my bracket for free last week. A lot of people here on the show took advantage, which was nice. And I mentioned last week, Johnny, I wanted to try to find a reason, game theory-wise, to go against Gonzaga. I couldn't do it. I mean, I had them winning. I do a lot of secondary brackets for fun of myself and try to go against them in those. But the side of the bracket where I thought we could have some chaos was on the right side, getting to the finals against Gonzaga. And I went ahead and took Tennessee to get there. And I liked them or Houston out of the Illinois bracket. And I just wished for my clients I'd used Houston instead. I did use it on a lot of secondary brackets. The good news, though, the bad news was Tennessee got bounced in the first round, which is awful when you got them going all the way. But to be honest, it might not hurt me much because now we've got, we have Syracuse, Oregon State, Loyola, and Houston.
Yep.
And no one's going to have three of those four teams in their Final Four. And as we've talked about, Houston was highly rated. In fact, the BPI gave them the third best chance overall of winning the whole tournament. Yet that ESPN article, I don't know if I referenced it to you. I think I saw it after I last talked to you last week. ESPN gave all 38 of their analysts, writers, and hosts one bracket to fill out. None of those 38 experts had Houston in the Final Four, even though they're the third most likely team to win it all. So I still don't think a lot of people are going to have Houston either. So basically, that bracket is that region is shot. So me having Tennessee in the Final Four doesn't hurt me that much in the big picture, which is just funny how you have to look at things. But I did like Houston a lot, and they play very slow like Loyola. They're just better. So I think that's where the run ends. By the way, Oregon State plays extremely slow like Loyola, so it wouldn't surprise me what happens in that game. But yet, 3 years ago when Loyola made the Final Four, I've told you, I did several shows that week. They go, we need a double-digit long shot that can make the Final Four, and I used Loyola. And I didn't think they were going to make it, but I knew they had a shot the way they played, just like Wisconsin when they play slow. But the networks, we talked about this last week, they did not want Loyola going far. They royally got screwed having to be an 8 seed and play Georgia Tech, the ACC tournament champ, and then play Illinois, the second-best team in the country, basically. So I love it. I love the fact that they're doing it, and I hope they wreck everything. And what a disaster for the networks. Oregon State, Loyola is a standalone game. I mean, first of all, two half-court slowdown teams. They got ugly uniforms like brown and orange and reddish. I mean, it's just everything about it's bad. But I love to see it happening because I can't stand the NCAA in general.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that would be a game that, first team to 50.
Yeah.
No doubt. But nevertheless, that style of play is working for Loyola. It was just 2 years ago that they had a run, and they got Sister Jean praying. And as I told you, I think it's hysterical when she said that on ABC News that she prays for both teams, but she prays a lot less for the opponent. And just said it's so adorable that, you just can't make that up. But I'm looking at the odds here to make the Final Four. Gonzaga, minus 450. That's pretty rich. Baylor, minus 150. Houston is third, plus 115. Michigan, plus 125. And then Loyola, 170. So Loyola would be going up against Houston. So the market's really, if you're talking about one game, plus 170, plus 115, that probably makes Houston 6-point favorite.
Yeah, by the way, it sets up well for me. The other sleeper I forgot to mention, the guy out of the Baylor region, I put Arkansas, and I wasn't looking. When they were down by Colgate by double digits, it's like, oh boy, here's my Final Four team that gets bumped in the first round. They win by double, and then Tennessee is my SEC that gets bumped. So it just shows you can't, once again, short-term thinking never does you any good, but it is setting up well, by the way, for Arkansas, because they've got Oral Roberts, a 15 seed. So it's funny how this is playing out for me. I just wish I'd used Houston instead of Tennessee, because, and Houston had their scare, by the way. I like the fact that they had that scare against Rutgers. Sometimes that's a wake-up call. I know you and I go way back into the 90s. Remember UCLA was at 94. They hit the half-court shot to beat Missouri in the round of 32 with Tynes Eddy, I believe, and they went on to win the whole thing.
That's correct.
It's amazing how often we see that. In Virginia, I want to say last year, it was 2 years ago, the last tournament, Virginia, overtime win, 1-point win against Auburn, overtime win against Texas Tech. Those were their 3 last wins of the 6 to win the tournament. Look, you play that out, 100 times, they're going to make it like, you tell me that's the scenario 100 times, they're only going to make it like 10 or 15 out of the 100, and they did it. But that's what
if that.
And people, Virginia was the national champ. There's so much luck involved. And I had them that year, by the way. Another slow-down half-court team. These type of teams in one-and-done scenarios are always dangerous, especially when you only have 1 day to prepare for them. Illinois only had 1 day to prepare for Loyola. I don't think Illinois probably loses that game, John, if that had been, this week when they had 5 or 6 days. It's a lot less likely I think they'd lose it. And by the way, I had a best bet on Loyola for my clients Saturday, so I like that setup. But there's so many intangibles that come into play. West Virginia, I liked them Saturday. I was wrong on that one. 1 day against the zone in Syracuse is always a concern, but I thought Huggins could do it. But now Houston has almost a full week to prepare for that zone. So that's another good, reason I think Houston advances and probably is the Final Four. And that most likely be where I hedge. It's harder for you to hedge here with Loyola because they're a 6.5-point favorite against Oregon State. That it's a lot easier to hedge when you're getting points. You're going to be in a really good spot against Houston because you could actually take them on the point spread. Loyola as a point spread dog and maybe even catch a middle. So you're not even hedging anymore.
That's a good point.
More money. So it's a great scenario to be in. It's not as good here against Georgia Tech, but you've got a huge mathematical edge, and I know you're a long-term thinker, as we've talked about.
That's a great idea. Yeah, I love it.
The underdog hedge against Houston's a no-brainer. In fact, I would hedge even more because of that, because you're basically getting a 6, probably like maybe a 6-point middle, like you said.
Yeah. I have to admit, I was. It was 2 bets that I remember, and I think the reason I went 0-3 on Sunday was because I tweeted the one bet. But the first one was, we're going to talk about live betting here. Arkansas is getting. It looks like they're in trouble. It's 33-19.
Yeah.
TV timeout, and people are probably listening to the other shows, getting tired of this story. But I'm walking my dog. All of a sudden, I pull the app out just to see. And I look at it and I go, well, how in the world could Arkansas be a plus 4.5 favorite? What in the world's going on? And I looked and I was like, this is where you pull the trigger, because I didn't bet Arkansas, but I liked Arkansas.
Right.
And getting them at plus 4.5 when the pre-flop was minus 14 or so.
Oh, no, I think that was that one. Was it? Yeah, no, it might have been. You're right. I wasn't involved in that one either, so that's why I was thinking it was 8 or 9. Yeah, it was double digits, I believe. Yeah.
So and you know how dynamic the lines move and everything. So I didn't get 4.5. I got 2.5, and I didn't expect them to rip off 17 straight to take a halftime 36-33 lead. But it's a pretty good example of
Actually, it was 8.5, 9 was the game line. That's what I thought.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, they were an 8.5 point favorite.
Oh yeah, that makes much more sense.
But
Being
you're
right.
getting them plus 4.5, correct? So you're getting
Yeah, that's what I saw.
you're getting a 13-point difference. So that might be what you were thinking. Yeah,
Right.
8.5, but you're getting a 13 to 14-point difference, basically. Yeah.
So that's was I think a pretty good example. But the problem with what I did was that I didn't have a plan to do that. I think if I had been watching a game and I would have set out a strategy and say Arkansas was 8.5. Okay, the volatility you want it to work for you. So, all right, you do 50% pre-flop minus 8.5, and then you look to add it -3, -2.5 is a good number, and then pick, and then you have your 100%. So you have three different bets, and it's not dollar cost averaging. It's not like you have an average bet of say 4.5, and you're going to win them all if they win by 4.5. There's still individual bets, but you certainly have a better chance now to win 50% of your bet after the flop than you do with the pre-flop. So, yeah, I think we talked about this the last time, the dangers, and you and I have been. I mean, a lot of the time, if we thought about it 25 years ago when we got in this, it probably was to show people you can do this with honesty and integrity, and admit when you lose, and say that what a good year is 57.5%. You do that, you're a rock and roll star. Instead of the Saturday morning shows that we saw in our youth, where there was inside locker room information, and you can get this game of the year for free. So I actually did an experiment back then. This was when I was on Wall Street. I had people call up that I knew lived west of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi, and it was their free game of the year.
Yeah, yeah.
So when that happened,
system by them though is because it's the 50-50-50. You get 1,000 people,
yeah.
You get to you're mathematically assured to get 50 people that go 5-0. It's a great business model though in hindsight.
Yeah, it was hysterical. Because if you notice on those shows, the following week they never said, "Yeah, we won our game of the year with the Patriots by 24 points." No, they never said that. They just were talking.
Because only half
right.
the people got the Patriots.
That's right.
Half got the Jets, or whoever they were playing that week.
The Jets.
Yeah.
But that the point is that's part of the reason we wanted to try to show people that it can be done. It's not the games aren't fixed. There is an advantage, but you have to know what you're doing, and you have to have a plan. And in live betting especially, I know a lot of people. I'm not afraid to say I still bowl in a bowling league, but a lot of those guys, their local team is their favorite team, and if they start out 10-0 losing, it's not a good scene. And furthermore, they don't recognize that they now have a positive betting opportunity presented before them that they don't have to take or they can take. But the guys, Steve, they have a bad game, and that team screwed me. That team screwed. I'm never betting on them again, ever. And what does that do? I mean, that doesn't do a thing. But I have to admit, I can feel what people are feeling when they first do this. They set up the account, and then if you put a couple grand in a betting account and you do your first bet, let alone your first 50 bets, and you're not a little nervous, like oh my gosh, should I really do this? Then maybe you're not normal. I don't know, but you just have to be careful not to get literally angry and say, well, screw that. I'm smarter than that last game that I lost, and I'm going to go and double up now on the 8 o'clock game. I lost that one too. Oh, Arizona State's playing Hawaii. All right, I'm going to hammer that at 11 o'clock. I mean, those are the things you just have to try to avoid at all costs. But, I know you feel the same.
I mean, that goes back to money management. I mean, that's a perfect example of what I talked about earlier. I mean, that's all money management right there. If every game has a 55 or 60% mathematical edge, you should be playing them all the same. So just because that 45% chance happened in game one doesn't mean you play double in the next 55% chance in game two. But that's what people do, John. You're right. And it also goes back to what else I was saying, the long-term thinking. The other problem, and it's less so now, because one thing I like about post-up accounts with all these legal sports books is that first of all, you're not betting on credit, so you have to have the actual money. So that kind of makes somebody have a bankroll, because it's probably not enough of a bankroll in your opinion and mine, but at least if they have a post-up account, which you have to have with FanDuel, DraftKings, any Nevada Sportsbook, you have a bankroll, technically. You're not betting on credit. Second of all, you're not living and dying by 7-day periods. That's the other problem with credit accounts and the local bookies back in the 90s, and less so now because more people have online. But it was it was a Sunday to Sunday or Monday to Monday, whatever it was. And that's why, like you said, people are tripling up on the Sunday night game. It used to be the Monday night game when we started. We're showing our age now. Now it's the Sunday night game. But that's the most heavily bet game of the month every week. And that's because people are trying to play catch up. And it's the same thing in the casino. I use the analogy with the casino. Casino doesn't even want a 55% win rate. Blackjack, all things equal, most people know basic strategy. If they have an internet connection nowadays, they can take 10 minutes and learn basic strategy. We're not talking card counting. You've got a 1% disadvantage if you just play optimal, and it's a 10-year-old can learn to do that. Craps, the sucker bets people like, because once again, they're not educated, they're easy to make, they're 30% households. But if you just play the pass line, which is a very simple concept still, and once again, I could teach a 10-year-old in 1 minute how to play the pass line with a $5 chip, it's less than 1%. So let's just say the house has a 1% edge in blackjack and craps. They make hundreds of millions of dollars with that 1% edge. And in sports betting, like you said, if we have a 4 or 5% edge, we have 55, 57%, break even's 52.5, and that's only a 4% edge. We can do extremely well. But the casino's doing it with a 1% edge, and that's because people go to a table, they buy in for $100, they're up 200 or they're down. If they're up 200, they keep playing. If they go down 100, they're gone. So they've lost 100% of their buy-in. The casino's down that 100, they just keep rolling and grinding. They're never out because their bankroll's infinite. And that's what people fail to miss. Once again, it's not about making the right decisions, picking the right team, making the right choice of the craps table. It's just money management, long-term thinking, and bankroll. And that's where people get in over their heads. Getting back to live game betting, though, it's funny. When we started 30 years ago, we talked about how things changed, with the boiler rooms. Less of that now because everything is so transparent with the internet, which I love. It's good for us. But the live betting, that's kind of the new wild, wild west the last couple of years. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity there still to exploit. And I think it'll always be there because you're going to get a lot of recreational players and sharps doing it. And I love that the sports books do all the games now because that means they have to automate the process. And that's where you're going to find your edges. They can't watch every game and be like, hey, look, this team is 1 for 10 from 3-point range. That's why they're down by 5. They should be winning outright. They're just going by the flow of the game. And it's like you said, it's really like an option, like buying an option for stocks or bonds or commodities or whatever. I mean, it's all time decay. And obviously, when Arkansas has that much time left, it's a good bet. If it's 5 minutes left in the game, it doesn't matter if they're the superior team because there's just not enough time left for you to hit that strike price. But yeah, I think it's fascinating. I know you, with your financial background, has to be all over it because there's so many analogies to like options trading and other things.
Yeah, like I said, it's going to feel weird, and I get all that. It takes a while to get that, kind of out of you that you're almost adding good money to bad money. If you're Arkansas and you're down 14, but it's also like looking at a chart where the moving averages and all the other indicators are lining up. That all right, this gap, it's like an arbitrage. You're selling Colgate, you're buying Arkansas. I mean, the spread was 14 in favor of Colgate, and you're expecting that spread to narrow down to 0. That's how you have to think about it. So it might be easier for people to start thinking of the end game that way, that the gap in the scoring between the two teams is too wide, or conversely too narrow. You can go the other way around too. You have Gonzaga against Villanova, perhaps hypothetically, say they go into halftime, and Gonzaga has a 1-point lead. That might be a pretty good time if you like Gonzaga to get on board with them for the second half. I don't like the second half line. Be honest with you, for the second half to start the live in-game line. But the game. The flip side of that is the craziness that I did while I was backstage with Rob Vino before our show, and a minute 20 to go. Ohio State's up by 2, And I still think this was a complete mispricing, or the public was just betting like with reckless abandon, because the money line was -1,000, meaning that you had to bet 1,000 to win 100 with a 2 point lead, 120 to go. Now, I mean, we should do a survey on Twitter. Would anybody in their right mind, without a game in front of them, without Ohio State being their favorite team, without Ohio State being their team that's going to win it all in their Final Four bracket, make that bet? Even if it was $100 to make 10. The point is, I looked at Oral Roberts. I knew they were the best foul throw shooting team in the nation. It looked like Ohio State might be on the ropes and really feeling it. And, sure as heck it came through. But then I made the mistake of tweeting it and bragging a little bit. And the betting guys got pissed. And I went 0-3 on Sunday. So I'll never tweet another money line bet like that ever again. I'll just mention it casually in some other fashion. But I'm kidding, of course. But that's the flip side, where you have no time to be right. You have to be right within a minute 20. But I was getting rewarded at 6.25 to 1 to take that risk.
Yeah,
so that's the difference.
Yeah, and one thing I want to point out about the live betting too is I do think there's great opportunities, but keep in mind, as you know, John, I mean, it's almost always -115 each side. Even some books have -120 each side. So, the theoretical household on -$1.10 each way, a standard wager. And keep in mind, if offshore other places you get -105, which if you're a long-term investor, once again, you need to take advantage of that reduced juice. But let's just say -110. That's the standard in the industry for decades. 20-cent line, that is, because each side is -110. The house has like a 4.5% edge. Once they get to a -120 line, a 40-cent line, it's like an 8.5% edge. So there's a nice little house edge built in, but I'm glad there is, because that means they'll keep offering this, and that means they're making money, and there's still spots as a sharp. But you do sometimes have 1.5 to 2 times percent the juice to overcome. That's one time where a halftime bet is better sometimes than the tip off the second half, because you're getting that -110 on the halftime line. Whereas once you get back to the end, the end game, you're getting -115. So that's one reason I'd side towards the half. But what I like about in-game stuff, it's the way I handicap in general, is I like to look for misleading information. And the odds are always set on base. More so than anything, they're set on final scores. It's really, I mean, everyone thinks the point spread is so mystical. It really is not. I mean, it's basically all things equal. It's you take the final scores and the strength of schedule, and that's it. I mean, and then you have to factor in maybe players or injuries or current form a little bit, and then the market moves it. But that's really what a point spread is. It's just plus minus margins of scoring and then schedule strength, and you're going to get about 80 to 90% of the point spread every time by doing that. So it's nothing magical about it. So what I like to look for as a handicapper, I think the way you beat the line is to find reasons why a team is better or worse than their overall seasonal numbers at that point. And that's where, a team like Georgetown, for example, went on that monster run. We see it all the time in the NBA. We've talked about it, these streaks. They last even longer with the over-unders, but a team they change something offensively. The odds makers are using seasonal stats. You get a 5 or 10 game leeway, for hot and cold teams. But same thing with the in-game betting. And what I look for there is disparity with 3-point shooting. A team that's dominating down low, maybe, they're going to continue to get easy baskets. A team like Arkansas, the tempo of that game, by the way, Colgate plays very fast. Arkansas plays that way as well. So that's another reason that play made a lot of sense for you. Now, Loyola, Oregon State, be careful. There's going to be less possessions there. So that time of decay, once again, when there's, 20 minutes left in the Loyola game, that's the same as 10 minutes left in the Arkansas Colgate game. There's going to be as many possessions probably. So a lot of things you have to take
Yeah, for sure.
But 3-point shooting is the great equalizer nowadays in these college games. And that's one of the reasons I was a couple games down for the weekend. I was on the wrong side of most of that. And, I had St. Bonaventure against LSU, a slow-down half-court team. I think they started like 1 for 11 from 3-point range. Let me know how you can handicap that, and we all can make millions, and not have to do anything else. And a lot of that is just random variance, statistical variance. But I think from an in-game perspective, you can take advantage of that and kind of play a reversion to the mean. One other thing, though, you talked about, you're not dollar cost averaging, but one thing for recreational bettors, be very careful with this in-game stuff, because money management is critical, as I keep preaching here today. And if you're not careful, when you bet a game beforehand, you play one unit. It's very simple. When you're doing in-game stuff, sometimes people lose track of what they have. You can bet more than 1 or 2 units because you've got a price spread, but you still could lose all those bets. You got to be willing to take a 3 or 4 unit hit, and most of the time you probably don't want to take that hit. So that's another reason. If you're doing this in-game safe, you might want to do less than your normal unit size pre-game, because you're going to want to get, like John said, 2 or 3 times into the course of the game, then you're going to have a unit or 2 total risk. So once again, money management is the theme of the show, I guess, is money management.
Yeah, and I think the flows of the game can impact you as well. Like, my favorite right now is doing 50% of my normal 4% or 5%, whatever my play is. So if a 4%, for example, is $100, I'll bet 50 pre-flop. Then I have 2 bets. Or I can have, 3 15% bets and make the last part of that 15% 20. So I would go 15, 15, 20. That adds up to the 50%. So I'm not exceeding my 4% bet amount. And I've heard horror stories recently where, and it's usually in the 20-somethings. Not that they're dumb or less intelligent than older guys like myself, but it's that temptation to go for it, especially when you are younger. I'm down 500 here. There's no way Ohio State's going to lose now, and then do the stupid thing and lay 1,000 to win 100. Those are the nightmares that I. A lot of our talk is education, Steve. So hopefully it's going to, even if it helps a couple people stay out of that pitfall, because there's nothing worse than waking up the next day trying to figure out how you're going to pay what you just did the night before. And to your point, there's no more. Back in the 80s and the 90s at the barbershop, they didn't do a credit check. If you wanted to bet a dime, sure, yeah. What game do you want? There was no credit check or background check or credit card or anything like that. So for that reason alone, that's going to prevent a lot of those monster disasters that.
Yeah, can you imagine if you could have done in-game betting 30 years ago on credit? My God, how many people would have gone bankrupt? I mean, because the worst case scenario here is you drain your DraftKings or FanDuel account down to 0. But I mean, on credit, you're draining your net worth down to minus 200% if you're not careful. So. Yeah, I mean, that would have just been a nightmare scenario. And, once again, I keep saying there's a great opportunity with in-game betting, and I think for years to come for sharp, bettors, and you're always like, well, will that edge still be there? And it will still be there for the exact reasons you're saying, is because we're getting more novice bettors than ever in 18 to 20 states that just legalized sports betting within the last year or two. And unfortunately, they're going to take the hit, and that's just how society works. That's how evolution works. It's the same thing in the commodities markets, as you know. Trading is a zero-sum game. Sports betting is not a zero-sum game. Everybody could be on one side and win. The sports book could lose 100% or win 100%. Technically, it doesn't happen that way, but they could. The commodity markets and even the stock market, as you know, is zero-sum. There's a buyer for every seller and a seller for every buyer, and there's a small percentage of people in the commodity markets that make all the money. It's the same thing in the sports betting market. That is the one similarity, and unfortunately, the square money in the in-game betting is providing opportunity for the sharp betting, because those lines are moving, based on the action. They're setting them based on an algorithm, but if they're getting ahead, they're going to move them. I mean, this is all computerized now. So unfortunately, we need people like that in the market. We don't want our viewers of this segment to be one of them, because there's millions of people out there. So let's keep everyone that we talk to sharp. But yeah, there's going to be liquidity, I guess, is my point, because there are a lot of squares out there, and it is so easy, like you said, to try to play catch up. And getting back to a bigger picture thing here, I mean, we live, as you know, in an instant gratification society more than any time in our lives, and I think it's a real bad thing personally. But I mean, we've already done 35 minutes a day, so we've already probably bored some people, because they want to hear who's going to be our best bets for this weekend, and 3 minutes later they're gone. But that's the same thing with in-game betting. It's so easy, click, click, click. But that's why I go back to that point about money management. You better make sure you have a game plan like John does, as far as, staggering in. And I love what you're doing there. Percentage of your normal play is definitely the way to go.
And I think eventually I'll probably go down to 25% pre-flop, especially in the NBA, because the higher the total, the greater the volatility of the game, meaning that you can have greater 10-point runs by both your opponent that you're betting against and your team. So that makes it even more reason to do less pre-flop. The risk there is that your team, their biggest lead is never negative. if that makes sense to you. In other words, they start out like a house on fire, and they're up by 20 in the first 10 minutes, and they never look back. So you never get that chance then to really add the rest of the pieces. But I think 50% start, and then you break it down, and you could even do 10% bets. Nobody says you can't do one thing or another, but that way you have opportunity before you, and that's what it's all about. But for our best bets, the game that's really I can't get my mind off of is Villanova Baylor. Villanova, if you don't already know it out there in the listening world, doesn't have Gillespie. That's their star player. I said on previous shows that I was pretty confident they'd be able to at least plug the gap that he leaves. They have a couple 4-star recruits. You don't know how the experience or lack thereof is going to impact the team at an NCAA tournament level. But they've probably had the easiest 2 games to play to get to this point, including all the number 1 seeds. And they're only a 6.5 point underdog to Baylor, who is really starting to show their muscle a little bit. Now's the time you guys are got to get out of our way. We have a Final Four to attend. But I'm just wondering if this is, I haven't decided yet whether this is a bet and then a sprinkle on the money line. But right now it kind of smells like it. So I want you to talk me off the ledge here before I make another bad move with a dog.
Well, what's interesting about Villanova, Gillespie's there, their point guard, and they've had 6 turnovers at each of their last 3 games. Basically no turnovers. So, yeah, it's definitely not affecting their ball handling. But like you said, they played North Texas. I had a best bet on Villanova, by the way, Saturday against North Texas. Both teams play extremely slow. Villanova does it better with better athletes. So that was a bad matchup for North Texas. They weren't able to confuse them with that half-court slow-down defensive style. And Villanova did not turn the ball over against a team that could force them, though, so that was impressive. The one against Winthrop is a very good team. I thought that had upset potential. I actually used it in my bracket because I didn't think Villanova would go more than a round or 2 if they did win without Gillespie. They are playing better, though, than I expected. But like you said, it shouldn't be a surprise. We get that every year with Alabama. They've only got 5 defensive starters back and 3 offensive starters. It doesn't matter because their backups are still NFL players. So there's a handful of teams like Villanova, and they've won 2 of the last 4 national titles, don't forget. So they very well could be a type of team that just reloads, and they've got guys that are stepping up now that would have stepped up next year, and they've got a great coach. But, yeah, they've been the national champ 2 of the last 4 years, and they played Winthrop and North Texas. So if you told anybody beforehand without any more information, hey, you could have a team that's won 2 of the last 4 national titles at -6 and -4.5 against Winthrop and North Texas, and you see here when you're starting to look at a big picture, the problem is Baylor's got probably the best and deepest backcourt in the tournament. So we're going to find out if that Gillespie injury really does matter or not against Baylor. But so far it has not, like you said.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about betting systems from time to time, mainly on that NBA, the Comic Relief NBA show at Wager Talk with Joe Ranieri and guest stars Steve Merril. Rob Vito and Ski Profit. I always have to talk about him. I got to get him on this show someday because I'll consider it a success because the guy's so laid back. If he's any more laid back, he's going to fall asleep. Yeah, and I would be scared as a host that I'm not engaging him enough, and all of a sudden he would just tune out. But anyway, this system here on Villanova makes sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to you, Steve, because you're a good critic of these things, you can tell me why. So we're playing against neutral court teams that are a pick or a favorite. So not necessarily tournament, but it could be the beginning of the season when they play these neutral court events or the tournament. And they're one of the better offensive teams in the nation, averaging 78 or more points per game. And going up against a team like Villanova, who's playing after the 15th game of the regular season, which is usually the start of the conference season, normally, and after allowing 65 or fewer points in 2 consecutive games. That's at 72% over the last 25 years.
Yeah. No, I like everything about that. And several things I'll point out, as you know, is first of all, sample size. That's a large sample. I like that, as far as years. And I like the fact also, one of the questions I was going to ask you is how far in did you start the game number? Because, obviously 78 points a game, 3 games in could just be a one-off. Plus they play crap teams normally early. So I love that it's 15 games in. And then the neutral court after 15 games basically almost guarantees that it's a conference tournament or postseason tournament game, probably 99%.
Yeah, it's exactly right.
So that's an excellent system for that reason. And then the other thing I like as well is you're basically doing a neutral court favorite. It's that simple. So you're saying it's the better team, it's the high-scoring team. Yeah, but it makes sense, though, because obviously Villanova is going to slow this game down. They're a slow-down half-court team. Baylor, though, does have the good guard play once again, going back to the fundamentals of it. But I do like that system. I think it makes sense. I don't think there's any, backfitting as far as, any parameters that are too tight. So, yeah, I think that's a good long-term system that should continue to do well because I do like good defensive teams against teams that rely on offense. Defense, you hear that old analogy, defense wins championships. We've become more offense in the NFL and the NBA than ever. But when you look at it, you still got to have a defense to win it. There still haven't been any Loyola Marymount's or, Paul West head coach teams that have gone on to win the championship, putting up 100 points a game in recent history. So, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
And while I'm at it, let's look at one. I'll lead the witness here, and this is one that has a terrible p-value, but I'll tell you what it is anyway. And it supports Villanova, but this is a way to, on the fly here, we're kind of teaching people like what is a valuable system, how do you know you have one, what's a bad one. In my opinion, this is a bad one. You're going to play on underdogs after going under the total by 48, specific number, or point total in their last 7 games in a non-conference game between 2 teams from major Division 1A conferences. That's a piece of crap. I mean, plain and simple.
Well, you said exactly 48 points?
Yes.
Yeah, that's the textbook 101 example of what we call backfitting. I mean, it's just...
Yep.
What you want to see there is depth. Now, if 49, 50, 51, 52, and 47, 46, 45 all hit 60% against the spread, then I'd start to look at it more. But even that, I probably would disregard because, what's so magical about a 10-point span there? But, yeah, that's John's point here is that when you have a typeset number like 48, it's just pure. You're going to, you could point out at 50 different results, you're going to get lucky and hit one of them. And that's just what the computer does when it finds systems like that. And what would be interesting, though, John, is that you probably have done some research like this. I'd almost wager to say if you blindly played against that system, you'd probably more times than not make money over the next 10, 15, 20 games. Because that's a totally 50-50 outcome, in my opinion. So if it's hitting extremely high, there probably is some reversion to the mean that's due to happen. I've never thought of it that way until now, but I bet you could actually backfit a lot of systems and do quite well fading them, actually, in long term.
It's going to be hard for me to describe what this is. This is where the word, it's one of those fancy words I hate to say publicly. It's combinatorial algorithms. So, the system I just mentioned that's a piece of crap is winning 63%. So, I take it one step further, and I'll try to make it simple. Starting with, if I was following that system in my database, and it came up with 5 consecutive wins, I would fade it. That would almost be as strong as the first one that I said. So, yeah, I have played around with that. More so...
the assumption that it's a purely 50-50 system long term, correct?
Right, and in that we're not flipping coins, because in flipping coins, heads, tails, it's mutually exclusive. You could have 7 in a row, and that doesn't mean that you're the Houston Rockets, The Houston Rockets are a bad team, so it's like flipping a bad coin that barely has a tails, and heads is due to come up again.
Well, it's a coin that has a 90% chance of coming up heads.
That's better.
It'd be a heavily weighted. The head of the coin is very big forehead.
Yeah. Once I get to know some of the people better on our shows, we'll have to reference that when you say big forehead or something.
It's funny you say what I'm thinking of in my head as I said that because I'm a visual guy. Is I'm thinking of the Eisenhower 50-cent pieces.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking of. It's like it's the defunct Eisenhower 50-cent piece, and most of our viewers probably that are under 40 have probably never even seen one and never will. But yeah, that's the image I had with the big forehead because he was bald and it's a big coin. some reason I feel like that would come up heads more than tails. We'd have to do some experiments on that. That might be, there was some talk about that with the NFL coin flip. In all seriousness, we
At the Super Bowl
up every year. Yeah, there has been some research done on that over the years. With some coins are more likely because they're so specific and artistic and everything else. I love it. You can handicap it. You can put odds on anything, even if it's 50-50.
Yeah, it's true. So, like, with that first system that's really good, if that would go, say, 3, I have systems where they lose 3 in a row, they become stronger. Because the probabilities of those situations, they have what is called a p-value. And some of our friends, Steve, said I should get away from calling it the p-value, which is actually what it's called. Like, if you went to MIT, that's what they would tell you. Right. And they suggested calling it the JR value. And, humbly said, I kind of like felt like the Prez, with the muscles, and I kind of like that, the JR value. But then that's going to get confusing because people are going to think that I fabricated this little thing. But all it does is it takes, like, if you have a system like we just talked about, we have a favorite, we have neutral court, we have team scoring 77 or more points, and we have after the 15th game, and we have allowing 65 points or less to consecutive previous games. The p-value will tell you how well those parameters correlate to one another in a whole mesh, of connections. So it may be calculating at first just the favorite against back-to-back games of 65 or fewer points. Or it may do that parameter against 77 or more. Then it'll add 3 of them and do that. And then the final would be all 4 of them. So if a p-value ranges from basically 0.99 to absolute 0. So if I get one that has point and then like 7 zeros before I get another number, that's a very strong correlation. It's a strong p-value. So those are the ones that really get my attention. But anyway, everybody's asleep.
Well, I was going to say what's interesting too, though, just someone has, there's nothing wrong with having different systems on financial markets, even separate bankrolls for these systems, and you can almost keep something like that, a reversion to the mean system, or bankrolls separate. I think that's not a bad way to do it. And then have the plays that you're handicapping on a daily basis separate. If they conflict, you just pass the game maybe. But see, then again, you got to make sure the win percentage long-term rate is the same on each. It gets a little tricky, but it's a good filter. I mean, I do the Fade the Public video for Wager Talk TV over at WagerTalk.com. Now, the NFL, we talked about it last week. The most public plays just going against them would have gone 31-7 the last half of the season once I started the video.
That's unreal.
I did it for the tournament this week. It was basically 50-50, but I did a lot of games. I basically did half the games. Most of those would not have qualified like on NFL Sunday. If you go back and looked at the most public play each day, Michigan State over UCLA, outright loss. Purdue over North Texas, outright loss. Saturday, Georgetown as a dog, always a red flag when they're on the dog, got blown out by Colorado. Sunday, I didn't do the video for Sunday, I only did it for the first round, but I went back and looked. It would have been Oral Roberts, so they beat Florida. I actually liked Florida in that game. They were up by 11.
So did I.
Half, as you know.
That's part of my own 3.
But I'm trying to think who it was yesterday, because I did Wager Talk Today yesterday on Wager Talk TV, and I did glance at it as I was doing that. Colorado was pretty public again, from what I recall, as a dog. And isn't that interesting? Most public play was played against them Saturday, and then they were one of the most public play 2 days later. And they shot, what did they make, like 14 threes Saturday? The 3-point disparity in that game between Georgetown and Colorado, 2 teams that were equal for the season, was tremendously different. I mean, that's just a statistical fluke. And yeah, so that shows how quickly the public is fickle in these big bet sports like Super Bowl, NFL in general, college tournament. But yes, I mean, there's different systems. But I tell people I don't just blindly play on or against those public teams. It's a filter. If I'm already looking at a team, that might get me over the hump to play them. If I'm questionable in a game and it's on the other side, I'll just pass it. It makes it an easy pass at that point. So it's good to have as many filters as possible.
Yeah, and one last thing I'll mention about this Villanova game, because we probably can get together for another show closer to the weekend when we can give out some really good, at least leans on the machine learning stuff. Now, another fancy word, there's machine learning, there's deep learning. They're all subsets of artificial intelligence, which is another, big word that everybody likes to say, and makes them smart.
Those people thought AI stood for Allen Iverson 30 years ago. Now we know differently, right?
Yeah. Well, I know some guys that still think that. But like with machine learning, you're trying to identify in sports. In my work, you're trying to identify a range of something happening. So, what's the probability of Villanova scoring 77 or more points against Baylor? And I haven't run it, but I don't know. I'll go through the example. If that comes up very high on the machine learning, and they're a dog, I can tell you right now that historically they have been astronomically good in that role. It's not saying that the machine learning is going to absolutely predict the winner of this, because I went 0-3 on Sunday. I almost like saying that now, Steve. Like I'm not afraid to say it. We've been doing this for so long. It's not the last time I'm going to go 0-3. But here I'm looking at some grids with Villanova. It's actually, I just plugged this in while we were talking. It's more.
One thing about that is if you could tell me how a game is going to play out, that's a huge handicapping factor edge. So even if the machine learning is like 70 or 80% of the time, if you know it's going to be a high scoring game, or you always see these angles and systems where like they hold this team to 60 or less. Those are great in hindsight if you know it's going to happen. Remember the old NFL systems in the 90s, like if you outrush your opponent, you cover like 90% of the time. And yes, that's because running the ball was more important in the 80s and the 90s, but it was more so because teams with the lead ran the ball more, and teams that were behind ran the ball less. So it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you could look at actual matchup stuff from machine learning, it's useful. And then angles and systems become more valid, in my opinion. And and like you said, it's not going to always be right, but it's not even trying to predict winners. It's really just to try to kind of give you a feel for how the game's going to play out. It can really help you with totals, obviously, as well.
Yeah, big time, especially with a dog like Villanova, and they're predicted to score 75 or more, 77 or more.
Yeah,
in this case, it's
looking at the over, because Baylor wants to get there.
Yep.
And Villanova's a slow down team. So if a slow down team can put some points up, and that sometimes concerns you in the matchup because that's not how Villanova likes to play. So that's not necessarily actually a good thing for Villanova as a side, but with the total. And now we have team total once again with all these online sports books, you can get a team total on any. When we started, you couldn't get an over/under on any college basketball game or any college football game in the 90s. And now they're on 1AA FCS games every day. It's insane.
Yep.
And I have to remind myself it wasn't always like that. And now you have a team total on every game. It's great. And the one edge we have is that we don't have to play everything, but they got to put a number up on everything now, and that's a great edge to have. And that's why, once again, people can make money betting sports, but you have to have that discipline. Yeah,
no question. That's the word, and it's easier said than done.
Oh yeah, no question about that.
I think it's probably why I go, for a hike twice a day with my dog during the college games.
I don't blame you.
It's
on DVR. Just fast forward through the last 5 minutes. That's all you need to watch because it's just noise in between. Now with the in-game betting and stuff, it's different. You need to be watching them live and stuff. So, but that goes back. By the way, I wanted to mention this earlier because you and I are big on quality of life and kind of balance and diversification and stuff. And be careful before you go down that rabbit hole, people, of in-game betting, second half betting, and whatnot. Because for me, I've weighed the pros and cons. I don't do that much of it just from a quality of life perspective. I don't need to be glued in front of my TV all night long. And then if you don't do it and you miss opportunities, and you're kicking yourself. So you got to decide if this is really the way you want to, make money, or do you want to play it kind of more, straight up. I play games beforehand. That's just my preferred method. Big games like the tournament where there's a lot of public money, or NFL games, I'll look more at in-game betting than second halves. But I don't want to have to be in front of the television for 6 straight months during every college and pro basketball game for 4 hours a night. It's just not a good quality of life, and it hurts my handicapping. And I've got hundreds of clients using my plays on a daily basis, so to me that's more important.
Can't agree more.
Point out, we're pointing out great ways to make money with in-game betting, but once again, it's not as easy as it sounds, and it's a grind. It's like being a pro poker player in the early 2000s. Everyone wanted to do that until they realized you got 5 screens in front of you, you're clicking 5 mice, for 10 hours a day. It wears you down after a while, so got to make sure it's not for everyone.
Like I was saying today, we talked about Houston Rockets. I actually, right now, sitting here, I don't know if they lost last night. And that's to your point. I didn't have anything on the game. I don't have anything on them today.
Until I saw a tweet about someone who had watched the NBA show. And we talked about it yesterday. So that's the only reason I knew that result, because I was not involved with it either. And I saw someone say they won by 20. It was actually 18, but they said 20 in the tweet. So that's actually when I first checked it. So, yeah, you and I think alike, and you and I are long-term winners. So once again, if anyone takes anything away from this video today, it's that, look, you don't need to live and die by every basket, by every point. You don't need to watch every play of every game. And I think a lot of people think you do. And it just shows that John and myself both don't necessarily handicap that way. So, yeah, it's funny you mentioned that game, because I just happened to see they snapped the terrible losing streak last night just on Twitter. But that's actually when I first saw the result, because I hadn't gone in and checked them yet either.
Yeah, that's good for them. It doesn't mean that they've bottomed. It's good that they won. I mean, it's healthy. But even like I kid around about it. Even if a team that I really like, even if I don't even have a bet on them, I just like if I was by myself, I'd watch it. But even sitting on Monday nights watching The Bachelor, with your girlfriend or wife, is better. Even as bad as that show was, it's better because you can get warped in the brain if you watch these games and then you see the bad call by the ref. Oh, the ref screwed me, and then it becomes an emotional thing. And I agree 100% with Steve.
Example is Colorado once again. They were shooting lights out on Saturday. That was a standalone early game, so everybody saw it on national TV. Yet it was all 3-point disparity. If you took out the 3-point difference, it was a fairly, well, I don't want to say close, because they beat them like 30-some, but that's all it was.
Yep.
But if you just look at the score, you're like, oh, they're up by 30-some points. They're a dominant team. How am I getting them as an underdog on Monday against Florida State? And like I said, it went from the least public play, the most public against play, to the most public play within 2 days. And, I'd rather look at the box score in-game or afterwards and see that difference and be like, that was really a 5-point game. Georgetown had played 4 games in 4 days last week. That makes sense. But if you're watching that game, you're like, Colorado's the best team in the country. And so, yeah, I think it actually hurts people more than it helps them. That's a perfect example, like you're saying. And then, like, watching The Bachelor going for a walk, we could handicap 24 hours a day. We wouldn't sleep, and we'd be worse handicappers. So, yeah, there's a balance.
Yep. Definitely.
Analysis from a paralysis from over-analysis, as you probably have gotten a few times over your years.
Yep. That's well said. Well, I guess we'll this is probably a good place to wrap up today's show, Steve. That's all right with you. And then we'll let everybody know when we're going to come back on. Maybe the games start up again Thursday, correct?
No, different this year. It's confusing.
Oh, that's right. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
Different this week. I shouldn't even say this year. Different this week. Now they're doing Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. They're keeping you guessing. Yes. And I don't blame you for not knowing that, because I didn't know it until a couple weeks ago. The only reason I even knew it's because I looked it up because I knew the first round was Friday and I wanted to see it. And I didn't realize they were doing that until a few weeks ago, and I even forgot until I saw it again this week. Yeah. And I didn't understand the logic on that, but I think it's because teams had to play Monday. So that makes sense in that regard, that they're getting the extra day, because they're not all on the same schedule now with the regions kind of mixing for the Sweet 16. So, yeah, we got the Sweet 16 Saturday and Sunday instead of Thursday, Friday. And the Elite 8 will be Monday, Tuesday instead of Saturday, Sunday. But we've only got with the Elite 8 2 games each night, Monday and Tuesday. So they'll be prime time Monday and Tuesday.
Oh, that's great. I like that schedule better.
Yeah, I do too. Actually, and just to wrap up, I thought this starting on Friday, but for me at least as a professional, was fantastic. It gave me an extra day to look things over. I liked having the games last night versus Sunday. I didn't really watch much Sunday because I wanted to get out. Our weather was really nice here. I watched a lot Saturday. Now I was kind of worn out after Friday and Saturday. I needed a little bit of a breather Sunday. I like this schedule. I personally hope they keep it in the near future, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I agree 100%. In my database, it says, in a database, the date would be listed as 2021-27-3-03. So, I had to look at a different column for the day of the week, and that's it in numeric form. So, Monday is 1, Tuesday is 2. So I did. That's the reason I didn't see it.
Yeah,
that's good.
People out there doing systems, don't rely on any NCAA Tournament Tuesday game systems, because you're probably going to come up with 0. I don't think that's ever. Well, actually, hold on. Disclaimer: those have been the play-in games over the last decade or so. So if you run any system based on Tuesday NCAA tournament games, you're going to get 16s versus 16s and 11s versus 11s. That's another terrible system to close the show out with, in case somebody I doubt anybody that has the capability of doing that would do that, but it is kind of comical still.
Right. And it could possibly involve the CBI tournament, maybe.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, there again, you got to be careful on which tournament you're looking at. Yeah.
But then you're looking at different levels of competition, and forget it.
Yep.
But Steve, always a pleasure. We'll figure out a time and let everybody know when we're going to really take the deep dive into some of these games and see if we can come up with a perfect card, and we'll be refreshed by then for sure.
Sounds good.
So thanks again. And for the Predictive Playbook, I'm John Ryan. And as Joe Ranieri gave me this slogan to say, may all the wins be yours.